Hey everybody, it's around about the 23rd, 24th of January, deep in winter here in northeast Scotland, and a surprisingly beautiful day. It's about 12 degrees, it feels like spring, which it shouldn't really. But anyway, the subject of this walk and talk is suicide. It's not an easy thing to talk about. If you are somebody who has experienced suicide in your family system particularly, or close friends, relatives, partners, children, please don't just dive into this talk. It's something that needs your presence, and my intention for sharing it is to help people understand it, particularly if you are having suicidal thoughts, to help you kind of make sense of where those dynamics, those thoughts, those feelings might be coming from, and to serve as a resource for anybody in that sphere, or anybody who's experiencing those kinds of things, right? The sense that we've lost sight of any future, and we can't imagine ever having the resources to create one. Essentially that life isn't ever going to get better, and anything would be better than the acute suffering we're experiencing, maybe over years or months. So I guess first of all I want to share just a little bit about why I'm recording this now. I've recently been abroad on a work thing, and was coming back through Inverness Airport, and I saw a poster, a local charity, a local kind of trust fund, if you like, set up in honor of a man who'd taken his life, leaving behind 3 small boys. The youngest was 2 months old, the other was 3, and I think the other was 5, and the guy was probably in his mid-late 30s. And the poster that I saw coming through the airport, which I was in several places, said, don't make a permanent decision based on a temporary problem, or something along those lines. You know, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Suicide isn't a solution to anything at all. It's a consequence of feeling that we cannot find a solution, and I totally understand why someone would use that phrase. It's a catchy phrase, but it's only a phrase someone who wasn't suicidal would use, because for someone who is suicidal, there's nothing temporary about those feelings. Someone who is suicidal has lost all reference of time. They have essentially been possessed by a very deep, dark psychological phenomena, and that's that phenomena that I want to talk about. To as I've said earlier, just to give it context, so that we can start to maybe, and this isn't to negate anyone's suffering or to diminish the seriousness of it. I mean, there couldn't be anything more serious than that, to my mind, for a human being to feel so bad, so isolated, so alone, so hopeless, so despairing that they would want to end life. And I can speak about that because I've been there. I once set up a charity to work with men, specifically to support understandings in communities around not just helping men not commit suicide or take their lives. I know the phrase commit suicide some people find problematic because they equate it to committing a crime, and suicide isn't a crime. It's a tragedy. So so I set up this charity, and after 4.5 years of sacrificing an enormous amount at a really crucial point in my life. I was kind of late 30s, coming into my 40s, and put everything I had into setting this thing up, and it became toxic. It regressed, and started operating outside of its basic principles and the law, actually, in several arenas, and became profoundly toxic. And I was shunned by a whole community of men that I'd, as I say, invested an enormous amount of my time, energy into, specifically to look at suicide. And I ended up waking up with the police banging on the door because I was suicidal, and some people had kind of called the police to come and check on me. I mean, I'd been suicidal the night before, and they turned up kind of mid-morning the next day. But I realised how close I'd come to taking my life. So I know what it's like to be in an acute space of intense pain and suffering, and not having access to any resources, knowing that I once had them and now I don't, and I can't imagine them coming back, and I can't face this pain. I can't deal with it. So I know what it's like to be brought to that place. And I have lost friends, one quite recently actually, just in November last year, who took her life. And I experience it in my line of work. I've worked with other psychologists and psychotherapists who've been suicidal, one of which many years ago came into my office and said, "I'm going to kill myself this week." And I believed him. So the first thing we need to do is kind of move shame aside. I know, as my work as a psychotherapist, that many people, many more people than would talk about it or admit to it, have experiences of what we call suicidal ideation, which is, you know, I think it might just be easier if I take my life, if I end my life. So, where do we begin to enter something that might be a useful conversation about suicide? I'm going to start with the psyche, which is something larger than psychology will ever fully understand, and which psychology generally tries to approach most often in a way that reduces it. It's a very complex phenomena. It's the process inside of us that wants to live, that wants to create, that wants to participate, that wants to belong. That wants to be fulfilled, and it's a function of nature. And I don't know if you can hear it, but there's the wild river Findhorn, which is definitely alive and definitely a very beautiful expression of nature. And the human psyche didn't just suddenly appear overnight. It has billions of years of evolutionary intelligence woven into it. I mean, that's what it is. It is deep memories, deep desires, deep understandings, sometimes what we might call, or I might call, pre-verbal. So appreciations for life in all of its forms. It's enjoyable forms and its less enjoyable forms in the pre-verbal realm. So what we talk about, just the felt sense. So it's not even an emotion, it's much deeper than that. It doesn't have language to it. We don't know what's happening down there. We're unconscious of it. And so the psyche has certain laws, like gravity. And across the stages of our lives, one of those laws is that we change, like the seasons, like nature. We are seasonal creatures. And we can't deny that. We're born, we're infants, we're children, and then we're kind of young adolescents, and then young adults, and then adults maybe, and then maybe we become parents. These different stages of development are personal evolution, if you like. But we live in a culture that doesn't honor that doesn't seem to know anything about that. It seems to want to or we seem to have created a situation where we should be perpetually immature, and we should just be experiencing lots of pleasure and joy and abundance, and we should be rich and wealthy and handsome, and we can do what we like and not have to deal with certain responsibilities that come to us as we grow. Certainly as that young man who inspired that poster campaign in the airport. 3 small children under the age of 40 close together. That's a lot of pressure to earn money, to be present, to support your partner. I don't know what was going on for him, of course, I don't. But that's a lot of pressure. So, and it's a lot of pressure that we seem to carry on our own as individuals. We're not very good at sharing things, particularly some might say men. Men aren't less emotionally intelligent than women. They just kind of have it educated out of them in families, in the education system, etc., which don't really cater for the needs, certainly, of boys to hone their horns, to find out what their aggression is about. This is an important point. Find out where their power is and how to marshal it, how to use it, and how to apply it. It's both infantilizing and emasculating. But when I'm talking about the masculine, I'm not talking about individual men. I'm talking about the deep structure of the masculine psyche. Has this force that we call aggression in it, driven by testosterone. And testosterone is something that causes boys to, that's what's happening to boys when they go through puberty, is this aggression hormone is starting to flood their system for no particular reason. And if they have not been educated, and by educated I don't mean told theoretically what it's about and how to manage it as a symptom of something, but actually how to meet it and embrace it and engage with it and learn to trust it and take responsibility for it, it goes underground. Right? It doesn't go away, it goes underground. And one of the ways it shows up is violence. And that violence is either going to go out towards the world, and it's going to be expressed in physical violence, psychological violence. It's going to be some distorted, it will distort power. Power being this generative energy that distributes things equitably and knows how to do that, learns how to do that in various contexts, and takes responsibility for doing that, so that we've all got enough of what we need, and we participate in that equitable distribution of resources, including making sure nature has enough of what nature needs. Right? It's not just anthropocentric. And anything else is a distortion of power. It's a manipulation of it. It's an abuse of it. And it's an abuse of power. So we have to abuse power by neglecting it, or trying to control it, trying to own too much of it, and then we in turn act out that abuse in our behaviors, in our thoughts and our actions. So it either externalizes, or if you look at violence against women and girls, it's only getting worse. And if you look at violence men against men, it's only getting worse in terms of the amount of war, conflict, fundamentalism. They're all actually symptoms of what we might call a deep impotence. Impotence being the incapacity, the lack of ability to embody our power in a generative way. To say, I'm going to do this and then stick to it. That's impotence. So these are functions of the warrior archetype, which is one of 4 core archetypes. The warrior comes online, puberty, the magician, and then the lover archetype, and the king archetype. Anyway, we're talking about the warrior and this testosterone and aggression. I'll show you where I am, because I know you can hear it. And so it externalizes and it goes out onto the world. I would say we're flooding with aggression and we can't control it. It's too much for us. It fragments us. We end up needing to unleash it. And it's like we can't contain it, like we are a kind of a tiny little vessel, and this very powerful primal energy is flooding into us and it's overwhelming us, and we need to kind of release it somehow. The other way that aggression acts out is we internalize it. We direct it towards ourselves. So if we think of it as this very powerful energy, psychological, biological, social force that needs structure, it needs discipline, it needs all kinds of things that we do not have rituals for, ceremonies for in our culture, that we trivialize and infantilize and express in very superficial versions. Video games, you look at the amount of video games that are fundamentally violent. Look at the amount of films that fundamentally talk about violence. All these like cool people walking around with guns. And then we look at what's happening on the streets all around the world, and boys are emulating their heroes, right? Who are not being powerful, not expressing their power by holding lots of complex things together in a way that they can learn and be creative with each other, setting clear boundaries, expressing it as clear intentions for ourselves and our lives, and creating what we need and what we want. They're expressing power by being the big man because they got a gun. Having power over people, not having power for people or with people, or trying to hide power, trying to manipulate it, trying to use it as a tool over other people without them really knowing about it. But this internalization of aggression is where suicide comes in, because it is that lack of ability to hold it, to digest it, to metabolize it, to transform it, to turn it into something else that overwhelms us. So what do we do about it? Well, we understand that it's a cultural problem, that suicide is not an individual problem, it's a cultural problem. And I believe it's going to get worse, unfortunately. After the pandemic, and looking at the politics, global politics, and the abuses of force and power and wealth as a form of power, of course, and the complete lack of empowerment of young men and young women, I think suicide is going to get worse. I mean, the situation is actually overwhelming, physically overwhelming, socially overwhelming. Many people are being pushed into more and more difficult positions without adequate resources to deal with it, and seeing other people withhold those resources or manipulate those resources, and kind of gaslight people who are struggling, saying, well, it's your fault that you're weak and if only you could get your shit together, then everything would be all right. Suicide in the UK, and I think the percentages are kind of around about the same across populations around the world. But every day in the UK, it's 13 men will take their lives and 2 women approximately. So that's a lot. That's thousands of lives lost each year to this terrible thing. And so if we look at the cultural footprint of it, if we look at the dynamics culturally that might lead us to that place, is a sense of powerlessness to change anything. But before that, we live in a culture and a society where we are looking at lots and lots and lots of images on our smartphones, on our computers, in the movies, of people doing incredible things, stupefying things, who've got lots of glitzy glam stuff, who seem to have everything. And even though we know most of that is complete bullshit, I mean, it's all bullshit, including the platforms that promote it, which is a manipulation in itself, right? Even though we know that intellectually, it does this thing where it sets us with an external reference point. It kind of says to us, if you are not like this, if you can't create this kind of life for yourself, there must be something wrong with you. You failed. You're no good. And of course that brings about probably one of the most toxic emotions humans can experience, or which is shame. And shame is not about, it's not the same as guilt. If guilt is, oh, you know, I bumped into someone's car because I was fucking around with the radio or wasn't paying attention in some way, and I did that thing, then I say, I'm sorry I did that. I'm guilty of that. I did it. If I'd done these other things differently, that wouldn't have happened. So therefore I'm guilty. So therefore I'm responsible. And therefore, if I'm a grown-up, I'll be accountable for it. So I'll say, okay, so I did it. I could have avoided it. I kind of let myself down. That thing happened. And I'm accountable for it. So I'm going to take responsibility for putting it right as much as I can, for finding the people who are affected and saying, what can I do? I'm really sorry. And I'm not just going to say sorry. There's a bunch of empty words. Oh yeah, sorry that happened. But I'm going to say, what are the consequences for you as you experience them? And what can I do within my power to make amends for that? All right, that's not rocket science. I think we all kind of know that. We all certainly wish that other people would do that for us, when, as we humans do, more often than we like to admit, we piss each other off. We negate each other. We don't respect each other the way that we should or could. So that's guilt. And so with guilt, we're kind of taking responsibility for the inevitable consequences of being human, right? We're all going to do something at some point that doesn't go down too well. And on reflection, if we're honest with ourselves, we're like, yeah, I could have done that differently. And maybe I can still put it right, without crucifying ourselves. That would be shame, right? So shame would be, I've done this bad thing. This is what we tell ourselves for shame. I've done this bad thing, and I've judged it as bad. I could have done better. And because I did that, not my behavior, but I as a human being am a terrible, terrible thing. And I deserve to be punished. So I will withdraw myself from life. I will essentially abdicate my power and tell myself a story that I am less worthy than anybody else of being alive, that I don't deserve to be alive and have these things or express these things. And so shame is really toxic because it's an internal thing and we want to hide it. That's the way that shame operates, is it says, if anyone found out I was feeling like this, they would think I'm weak, and I already think I'm weak. So I'm not going to risk a double whammy. I can just about cope with knowing it myself, right? Because when we are in that space, we're not thinking about, we don't have our rational cognition. We're not able to say, well, suicide would be an extreme response to something that's temporary, or even however bad it is, maybe if I stay alive and other people are willing to support me, I can find a way through. And maybe even if they're not able to support me, I can find a way through. That's what kept me alive. I was like, okay, and I'm going to come on to something else that's really significant in a sec. So shame is toxic for that reason. And if you add shame into a situation where there is a lot of power that is regressive power, right? That doesn't know how, that's never been taught and has actually been taught not to affect the world, not to be creative and make things happen in the world, to structure and order the physical realm, not abuse it, but structure and bring order to it, which is what the masculine does. If you that's the masculine's function in nature. And of course, men and women have the masculine, and women and men have the feminine. So if you don't have that sense of, okay, I can express it outwardly, and it's regressive and it turns inward, and you add shame to that, that's the road to suicide. I'm worthless and I can do something about it, which is ending my life. That's the agency I've got. That's where I feel I've got some kind of control. That's where I can stop these feelings. That's where I can end that scenario forever. So I hope that makes some kind of sense as an understanding, a way of understanding what's happening inside of a person. What's happening inside of a person. It's a temporary solution. There is nothing else when you're in that space. There is no other possibility. That's what it feels like emotionally. And so, if, for instance, boys had been not controlled, but marshaled, had been taught to marshal their aggression, if they had seen not just their father perhaps or one or two other men, but society, men at large, so they were always coming into contact with men who are like, yeah, I'm really fucking pissed off about it, and yeah, I feel really disempowered by it, and yeah, I'm just going to chill my boots and I'm going to find a way, and I'm going to take that energy and that aggression that I've been directing inward toward myself in a damaging, destructive way, and I'm going to sit with it, and I'm going to be like, what else might I do? How might I use that as motivation for doing something that really honors the truth of who I am deep down, beneath all those layers of culturally being shamed and very often, very subtly shamed for our emotions. Don't be angry, don't be sad. Some people call it the boy code or the man code. It's a bit basic, but it works. It's a bit reductive is what I mean by basic. Because, and this is something else that I'm pretty that I see happening a lot, that actually happened in Journeyman UK. It was that mothers would bring their sons and say, I want them to undergo the rite of passage adventure weekend, And the teenage boy might have been a complete terror, right? He might have been disruptive at school. He might have been causing havoc at home. And I'm sure lots of the single mums and some of the mums still in good, healthy relationships, it was the mums who were bringing the boys along. In the vast majority of cases, they were hoping that somehow that would make him a good boy, that then he would start behaving. Right, so there's an implicit intention to control this force. So these are teenage boys, and they are just starting to come into contact with testosterone, and testosterone in a teenage boy who doesn't have any mentoring, who doesn't have any modeling, who doesn't have any containment, who perhaps is already had a chaotic life and a destabilizing life, or perhaps he's already experienced some kind of abuse himself, is dangerous, because as soon as that energy gets in his body and he starts growing muscles and thinking, fuck it, I'm not going to keep this in anymore, I'm going to direct it out, he's a risk not just of being aggressive, not just of expressing anger, but of becoming violent. And so in many people, and this is no criticism, it's completely understandable, it makes sense, and it actually makes sense of a lot of cultural rituals that happen in indigenous cultures, and some that still happen in other places, and it makes sense of male culture in many ways, is that women start to control it, because boys, until they've had an initiatory rite of passage where they have been moved fully into the realm of the masculine and being supported in taking responsibility for that power, that energy, that aggression, are going to be dangerous. You're never really going to know, right? Because they're going to hold it in and 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 bury it and bury it and bury it until they either become depressed and impotent, or they lash out and they kill other people. Gun crime, knife crime, it's not just about trying to be one of the big boys. That's a group think toxic culture acting out. That's how I prove my power, is I got to make someone else suffer, that I can do that. I'm going to seem to be a big man, because that's what I've seen on the screen, and that's what I'm modeling, or that's what I've seen in my neighborhood or my community, or I've been told, you can't belong to the big boys gang until you've done that. It's a shadow initiation, and it's actually a psychological expression of immaturity and impotence. It's a mask for a deep sense of, I don't know who I am, I don't know what my life is about, I don't know what I want, and what these older people, these grown-up people are telling me is that if I do this, then I'll be a man, then I'll belong to the men, and by association I'll be one of them. But it's an abandonment of an authentic sense of self in anybody, at any stage. When you sell your soul to something, when you do something that harms somebody else to seek approval from your peer group, for instance. Bullying in its extreme. And so and it's in this, it's me or you dynamic. There's not enough maturity to go, well, it's us actually, that I've got this opinion, you've got that opinion, all kinds of different expressions of it, but let's stick with the masculine thing. So that kind of like, don't be angry, don't be sad, generally acculturates boys to dissociate from their emotions, and then they take on this performance identity, or what I might call the performance identity, where they're looking around outside of them, looking around at the world that they live in, and saying, well, to be cool, I've got to have that kind of car, I've got to have those kind of clothes, I've got to have that kind of watch, that kind of phone, I've got to go to those kind of places, I've got to listen to that kind of music, I've got to be with those kinds of girls, because that's what the outside world tells me I need to be, to belong. And boy, do I need to belong, because we all do, because humans are relational creatures fundamentally. There's nothing we can do to turn it off. So we follow the crowd, and we essentially therefore give the crowd and the group think the power to dictate what we do, how we spend our money, how we spend our time, the choices that we make. They're not really choices, they're reactions. And we then become identified with this performance identity. We think that's really who we are. We think and feel as if that is true for us. And then we get to a certain point in life and something happens, life being uncertain as it is, and that performance identity really doesn't know what to do. It can't fit in anymore. It doesn't have the resources, the intelligence, the intellectual, emotional, social skills, understandings to be able to deal with something that is complex and might at first seem overwhelming. You know, my wife left me. I lost my job. Whatever it is, something that changes, you know, a significant change in the outside world. If our identity is predicated on what we are, you know, who we are to these other people around us, that knocks us for six. It destabilizes us. If we then realize not only have we been knocked for six and destabilized, we don't know how to stand up again for ourselves, how to begin again. We're in a dangerous place. Now, indigenous cultures would ensure that boys underwent an initiatory rite of passage, that they had to undergo some kind of process that was witnessed and held, created, perhaps over millennia, by the elder men in their tribe, not just by their peers. You know, Robert Bly wrote a book called Sibling Society, which is about how boys now and girls are just looking sideways to people their own age who also know fuck all about life. and that's where they act out. So then they can't really grow up because there's no one ahead of them holding them to account, giving them responsibility, helping them take it wisely, helping them learn, helping them make mistakes in a graceful way. So they really learn who they are. They learn what life is about. And those initiatory rituals usually involve some kind of suffering. Something I've shared quite a lot is the Akutamawe tribe in the Amazon, who use bullet ants, right? So the sting of these ants is 100 times more powerful than a bee. And by some ingenious way, they go and find a load of these ants and they put them in a potion. The medicine man, the shaman, makes some kind of potion and the ants become drowsy. And then while the ants are drowsy, they stick their abdomens so they're facing inside a woven glove. Right, and then the ants wake up and they're rightly pissed off because they're trapped by the abdomen. And they're not just like a bee where they sting once and then they die. They can keep going all day. So the initiation ritual is that the whole village gathers around and the boys understand what's happening because they've seen the older men in the tribe, the actual men, psychologically, physiologically, emotionally mature and responsible, and they've got nothing to prove. Because the time when they proved anything to anybody was during the initiation ritual, and that requires those boys to go up and submit themselves and put their hands inside these gloves and wear them for 10 minutes. So they've got both hands being exposed to and repeatedly stung by 200 ants, both sides. After 10 minutes, they take their hands out of the gloves, and the venom in that the ants have been injecting has turned these boys' hands black. And their bodies are heating up, intense heat, as their bodies try to process the venom. So then the rest of the tribe gather around them and they link arms and they dance in a circle. So that's a ritual that everyone is there to support the boys in that process. And by the way, if they sat down and stopped dancing, the venom would overwhelm them. It affect their liver and their kidneys and they would die. So they have to keep moving even though they are in excruciating pain. And when they take the gloves off, the pain doesn't stop soon after. It maintains, and it actually increases, I believe, for up to 24 hours. And then, of course, they're exhausted. And they don't just do that once. They do that something like 20 times over the year. So they're not just in this mindset where they're like, well, it's only once, and if I make it through once, then I'll be all right. They are understanding that there are things in the world that can cause them intense pain again and again and again, and they are making a choice to meet it. They have to believe that there is something inside of them that is larger than that intense pain. And that while they are facing it, they will be supported by other people. We don't have anything similar in our culture. We have the opposite. We have a lot of experience of when I needed support, when I was asking for support in the Journeyman charity, when I really desperately needed it because I was burned out, I was shunned, I was removed, I was ejected from the tribe. My men's group, right? That was, and I was already suffering enough because of something that I'd done, and I needed support to come through that and help me make sense of it. Essentially burned out, taken on too much, because I believed in something larger than me. I believed that we could start to reclaim some meaningful rites of passage for boys, so that when life throws everything and the kitchen sink at you, you're not having to kind of like run around like a headless chicken. You're just like, well, I might not have the solution right now, but somewhere inside of me, by grace of the fact that I'm a human being and I'm a man and I'm alive, there's some way through it. And that actually maybe this is just the challenge I need to find even more of my authentic self, to embrace even greater potentials that live within me, so that I can live my life free from the need to impress anybody out there. It doesn't mean I don't give a fuck what other people think. It means that that's not my primary thought process. It's like, well, I can consider other people, but at the end of the day, it's got to be my decision. And I'm going to go this way or that way or another way. And I can tolerate, sometimes I'm not going to know. It's going to take a while for me to find those answers. And maybe I can't find them all on my own by myself. Maybe I need to reach out and ask somebody else if they've got a few minutes to have a chat with me. Doesn't sound tricky, does it? But boy, is it tricky. And it's tricky because if you are really seriously on a journey of healing and growth in any context, and you are hanging out with people who are not, who might be saying that they are, but are not, they will feel threatened by your power, by your sense of growing self-awareness and personal agency, sovereignty, we might call it. And that will, in their immature mind, they will project and transfer their whatever their stuff is, they will try and give it to you and make you own it. Or if it's too much, they will just eject you, which was my experience. Right? If you're too vulnerable or you're too powerful in their eyes, they don't want to experience their sense of vulnerability, and they don't want to take responsibility for their power either. So it's very tricky, very tricky. So how does this relate to suicide? They are the cultural dynamics that we live in. They are not fictitious. I could give you hundreds of examples where people, and working as a psychotherapist, as I do from time to time, come to a place in their lives where they don't know. They haven't got the answer. And they've been told that they should know the answer, because in our cultures, especially through the education system as it is, in the vast majority of cases, you are deemed worthy if you pass the exam, if you get it right. Not for the learning you did. The pass mark is a proxy for all the effort that you put in. You might have cheated and put no effort in at all, but you still get the pass mark, and you still get the certificate, and you still get to go to that university or whatever it is, whatever that mark is. Or it's money, right? So you've got this much money, therefore society says you're a worthy human being. You can hang out. I can hang out with you because you're loaded. You might be a complete scumbag, but you can present and play that game. But when the game stops and we realize, often for ourselves, that we've been fooling ourselves, that we've been denying our deep longing, and maybe we don't know what that is, maybe we never knew, maybe all of those fitting in strategies were a survival mechanism, right? Maybe that's all we could do. And now I don't know how to get beyond survival, and I can't handle the pain of staying where I am, so I'll just take the exit. Over the years, I've worked with dozens of men and women who have eventually revealed to me in some way that they lost a parent to suicide, usually their father. And the impact that has had on them and their development. And some people develop serious chronic illness as a consequence of the unresolved pain that they are in at having lost a parent. That implies all kinds of things to a child, as it would. Somewhere many years ago, reading through papers on the subject, I heard that if you're someone close to you or in your family has committed suicide, you're 10 times more likely to try it yourself. I also know that two-parent families, stick with a traditional model just for a sec, two-parent families, children of two-parent families have the same likelihood of being incarcerated as children who just live with their father. And that might be a contentious thing to say, but because the father aspect, the masculine aspect of the psyche that hopefully gets passed through the father and the males in the family system to boys and girls, is responsible for navigating the outside world. If we don't have that as a model, as an imprint, then we find it difficult to navigate the outside world. Conversely, and I reckon it would be proportionate if someone wanted to study it, the feminine and women are here to their responsibility, their spiritual contract, if you like, is to help us interpret and relate to what is within us, the emotional realm, the sensitivities that we experience as human beings, men and women, and all genders. We might configure these things in different ways, to different degrees, but we've all got it all inside of us, that's for sure. So so what do we do if we're suicidal? One of the other drivers, I think, a significant driver, is this understanding that we should know, and we should be able to get it right, and we should be able to know, and we should be able to get it right now, that it shouldn't be a struggle, that we shouldn't have to figure it out, that we should just know. And because I don't know, there must be something wrong with me. Everyone else seems to know. Let me tell you, most people don't know. Most people haven't got a clue. And most of society and culture is functioning on the basis that lots of performance identities don't rock the boat. Don't say the emperor has got no clothes. That we just keep towing the line and playing along. And it wouldn't matter the nature of the political party. It's the psychological dynamics that I'm speaking to. The Tory party in the UK at the moment is a complete exercise in groupthink, where the headlines are, the chair of the Tory party, who has just got into trouble somehow because he managed to forget £27 million that he'd earned in relation to his tax affairs. He's convinced that he's done nothing wrong. And the man who has helped Boris Johnson get a loan for £800,000 a few short weeks before he was nominated as chairman of the BBC, while Boris Johnson was, Prime Minister, he's also convinced he's done nothing wrong. As they would be, you might expect, right? So until there are enough people in the world who can take responsibility for that and say, well, actually, that's wrong, and it's just wrong, it's morally wrong, it sends the wrong message, it engenders more corruption, a lack of trust, a lack of faith in the systems and the institutions that are here to protect us and support us as human beings that we need in any civilized society. It's going to get worse, right? So this understanding that suicide as a phenomena is a very painful, excruciatingly painful, unbearable. The rational mind, it's unbearable. Whatever I'm experiencing, it's unbearable. You think about the intelligence and the wisdom that developed over millennia in the Akuta tribe, who said, the best thing for us and our boys is to basically torture them, to give them an incredibly painful experience that will make them think they're going to die. They will want to die. That the pain will physically be too much, but we'll hold them while they go through that. Not just once, but 20 times. So then they learn something deep, really deep, that life is painful, and I come through it. And so I'm not walking around in fear anymore. And if I'm not walking around in fear anymore, then I don't act that fear out with other people. If someone else pisses me off, so what? Does it matter? It doesn't matter. We learn in that kind of process what is important and what isn't important. So that is a kind of a death to innocence, right? If you've undergone that Akuta Mawe experience, that's a death of innocence. You understand profoundly that the world isn't just about being breastfed and being wrapped up in cotton wool and having people agree with you, that you need to be a full-range human being. You need to be the wild man, not the savage. They say the difference between the wild man and the savage is that the wild man knows he's wounded, and I'm not sure about that, but the wild man knows he's not invincible, right? That he has vulnerabilities, that he has sensitivities, that there are things that can bring him down, and he knows he can grow through it, that it's not the end. Right? The end will be the end whenever the end is. And it's by hanging out in the uncertainty and in the pain and trying not to do that on our own as much as we possibly can, that we learn the most about who we are as humans and what it means to be a human. And then we become genuinely a resource for other humans. If we're always buying shit to cover up the big hole inside or pretending it's not there, if we're always avoiding the difficult conversations, if we're always kind of clinging to things that we know are not good for us, whether they're substances or people or jobs, or staying in situations that are draining the soul out of us because they are so meaningless to us, so futile. If we can't say, what, I'm bigger, there's something inside me that's bigger than that, and I'm gonna work out what it is. I'm gonna at least start that journey, and it might take me 10 years. but I'm going to keep faith with this larger part inside of me. It's inside of all those boys in the Kuta Maori tribe, the 12, 13, 14. And that's an archetypal resource, so that's available to all men. But we're not taught it, we don't know it's there, and many of the pathways that would lead us to it are diminished and obscured in our culture. We're distracted from them in really superficial ways. Mostly, and social media plays a massive part in that, in at least presenting those messages, if not just being a massive distraction in and of itself. So, so this idea of the end of innocence, that this is serious, and it's beautiful, and it's serious, and it's dangerous, and it's beautiful, and it's serious, and it's beautiful, and it's dangerous, and I'm here, and I'm part of it, and I have choices, and I need to pay attention, and I need to take responsibility for myself. That's a death to a certain part of the psyche, and some people might call it the ego, but really I think what we're doing is we are taking the ego from being immature to being mature, to being immature and dependent and codependent often on the world outside of us for our sense of validation, to being independent and therefore able to be interdependent and actually have mature relationships with our work, with our colleagues, with our partners, with our jobs, without playing all these subtle bullshit power games, acting out we would call it. But that death, if it just seems to be some random meaningless event, is really fucking painful. And if there's no meaning, if we don't understand what's happening and we've got no frames of reference or ability to make meaning out of it, that actually it's an invitation to a larger life. But by the way, you're only 3 years old, you can't drive the car. You need to wait and you need to do some work so you can learn to drive the car well, and then you can get your license, right? You need to be a more mature being, a more mature creature can drive cars. 3-year-olds can't. So we've got lots of people, sometimes I use this analogy, that are kind of like psychologically 3 years old, and it's as if they've been possessed by some fake adult who is holding a gun to the child's head saying, you've got to drive the car. And the 3-year-old is like, well, but I can't drive the car. And the adult is saying, no, you can drive the car, you must drive the car, you have to drive the car. But the 3-year-old isn't mature enough, isn't grown enough, hasn't had enough experience, can't withstand the levels of pressure and complexity that the adult could. So in many ways we infantilize ourselves and say, I can't do it. Well, maybe you can't. Maybe there are some smaller steps you need to take and build things up. But until you have a framework and some concepts where you can go, oh right, my life has absolutely crashed into the wall and nothing works anymore. I wonder what the invitation is beyond that. I wonder what part of my psyche, which is profoundly intelligent, much more intelligent than this little brain that we have. What is my psyche calling me to? So I think I'm going to leave it there, and hope that that was coherent enough and made enough sense to help some people somewhere, maybe in situations where that would be useful. And it doesn't have to be that extreme. We don't have to be suicidal. We can be just profoundly stuck and going around the same pattern again and again. Where we're not really growing and healing and finding more of ourselves. That's a symptom that some part of us needs to die. And so ultimately what we can say is that suicide is an over-identification, a psychological over-identification with a part of us that is suffering and cannot solve the problem on its own. Now, I'd like to say that, just reach out and speak to people. I know that's not always possible. But if we have some place that we can go to where we know we can find some sense of resource, some sense of there might be if I just hold something meaningful in my mind, that might be a gateway, it might provide a little opening somewhere beyond this. So we become over-identified with the part of us that does need to die, that can't do it, and it would be foolish to expect it, and that betwixt and between is profoundly uncertain and therefore scary. And that's okay. It doesn't mean we have to die. We have to, we have to find a way to ritually kill, honor, and ritually kill some immature part of our psyche, like is happening in that Akutamawe ritual, where those boys in that dancing, even while they're in the pain, they're not understanding this rationally. It's an experience. It's an experience. They're not like philosophizing about it. They're undergoing the experience, direct experience. They're not writing a paper about what it might be like for somebody. They're in it. And their psyche is like, yeah, this is really fucking painful, and I'm dancing. Yeah, this is really fucking painful, and I'm dancing. Yeah, I think I want to die. I feel like maybe I will die, and apparently I'm dancing. Right, that there's something else comes into the frame when we can't do it with our little self, our little s self. Right, and that's woven into life. That's part of human evolution. To become psychologically, emotionally, spiritually mature is to understand sometimes we can't do it, and that's okay, but it's not an excuse to stop. It's a reason to rest, to reach out, to learn essentially to be with uncertainty and the profound discomfort that has in our culture for people. To understand that there are things inside of us that we don't understand, and maybe that don't belong to us. Things inside of us that we find difficult, challenging, nasty, regressive. Our old traumas, our old neglect, our old shame, all that kind of stuff that we need to burn off. And we can find ways to do that. Not by going out and getting drunk and pretending it never happened or distracting ourselves, but by turning towards it and saying, okay, I'm not ready and I don't know how to do this, but I'm not fucking going anywhere until it's sorted out. And maybe I need some help. We probably do need some help. I know I've had some help. So yeah, we over-identify with the part of us that does need to die, and we kill the physical body rather than a part of the psyche that needs to die. That's just like, please stop asking me to do this bullshit. It's meaningless to me. I can't do it anymore. I want more than that. And that's our job, to start getting creative, start breaking some rules, start making some different kinds of choices. And that's a struggle. That's not easy, but nor is being stung by bullet ants. And nor is living as somebody whose parent or friend has taken their life, understandable, and without any intention to blame or shame any of those people. I know what happens after the event, how painful that is, how confusing that is, and how much, without going into any self-pity, how much suffering is caused when we really have to empathize with the amount of suffering that someone was undergoing, that was significant enough for them to take their lives, and without us ever having a chance to do anything about it, without them ever reaching out to us and leaving us feeling like we failed. That's difficult too. So I hope it's useful, and I'll just leave you a view back up the Findhorn River in late January 2023, when the world seems to be going to shit. Understand you don't have to go with it.